Good afternoon. My name is Paulo Fernandes. I am with Mastercard's Enterprise Development Partnerships team. And what I do is part of a team that basically leverages Mastercard's assets in data and transactions into different industry verticals, specifically B2B industry verticals, of which freight is what I'm going to speak to you about today. I am specifically responsible within Mastercard for our port ecosystems strategy globally. So before I start and talking about port ecosystems, just a few points from my understanding of Central Asia. The Kazakhstan economy is obviously very rail-centric. It is an industry that was not that much impacted by the pandemic. From what I understand, from January to September of this year, 187 million tons of cargo were transported via the Kazakhstan railway services, which is substantial, but also very little impact from the pandemic. From what I understand, is even some increases between 1 or 2% over last year. Nevertheless, the authorities and the objective of the forum is really to look at ways to reduce the administrative barriers, basically modernize the infrastructure, and above all, optimize the technological processes. And this is what I'm here to talk about, that even though this is a rail-centric economy and rail-centric transport, it is part of a wider global supply chain, and is specifically part of a wider ecosystem of freight. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today, talk to you about what's happening globally in terms of the port ecosystems, the freight ecosystems, what's happening in terms of trends, etc., and where a company like Mastercard plays. So if we have a look at that question as to why Mastercard, why freight? Well, first of all, it is a substantial opportunity. When you consider the amount of services, amount of data, amount of transactions that flows just to get containers from point A to point B, we estimate this to be about a 4.1 trillion global opportunity. It is an industry that is ripe for disruption. It is complex and highly fragmented, which is an ecosystem that comprises of a lot of private and public entities trying to work together to basically overcome inefficiencies. Interestingly, there are focal points. So even though it's fragmented, there are a few focal points, and those focal points are what we call the port ecosystems. Whether they are physical ports of entry, whether they are maritime, dry ports or airports, or in the digital world, whether these are digital or virtual digital exchanges, there exists this basically focus on these hubs that basically become the center of global trade. It's an industry going through a digital transformation. It's gathering in pace, and I'll mention a few examples as to the result of why COVID has accelerated this. But at the end of the day, as a technology company, Mastercard is digital by default. That is basically our essence. We are a digital by default technology company that has had substantial experience in the contactless customer experience in the banking and finance. And now we're bringing this over to the B2B space to increase process efficiencies and reduce costs. And I'll be providing you some examples. So when we think about the freight and logistics and global numbers, there's $23 trillion of cargo. This was the amount of trade that was basically contracted last year. To get this cargo from one point to the other, to pay for this cargo, we estimate is about $1.5 trillion was spent in the logistics alone. And just to keep in mind that when we talk about cargo, we're talking about containers, of which is 90% of everything around you. 90% of everything we consume comes through a container that comes through a maritime port. However, there are key problems, as I mentioned earlier. It's still very paper-centric, and manual processing of documents can take up to 20% of the cost. It is estimated that the average beneficial cargo owner interacts with about 28 different entities to get their goods from point A to point B. And basically has something like 200 interactions, whether it is re-entering data, exchanging documents with authorities. It is highly efficient. Digitization, we believe, can overcome these barriers and increase global trade by 15%. It is estimated that just for small businesses, digitization and logistics technology can decrease their costs by about 80%, contributing to about $4 trillion of global economic growth. So what are the key challenges to this? What are the key problems that we are facing? First of all, it is far from contactless. It requires a lot of human interaction. Data silos. There's a lot of different, and I'll be talking about this later, there's a lot of different systems that need to interact with each other, and therefore making it important for people to reconcile manually, exchanging documentation, and this becomes time-consuming and very paper-centric. What this leads is to complexity and fragmentation, which leads to high costs and poor customer services. These are the key challenges that are facing the freight and global supply chain. Now, I took a quote from a company that is involved very much in the integration of data. They do a lot of the new blockchain integration between shipping lines and terminals. And they estimate that data technology can resolve 75% of these industry challenges. However, the remaining 25% can be solved with event-based freight payments, because at the end of the day, somebody has to be paid. That's what we're in for. We can exchange as many documents as we want. At the end of the day, the funds have to be made. Perhaps the most important piece. So just a few points on the global pandemic and what this has meant. Well, first of all, the global pandemic has accelerated the remote, what we call remote interaction. What that means is the ability to pay and collect remotely. So for instance, you don't want people to go into a terminal to wait at a counter in line to actually release their cargo. You want to come up with solutions that enable the contactless payment. So what we are saying is that we see a huge shift towards contactless payment, a move away from cash and paper. And in this space, what is happening is that what we know as digital disruptors. These are new companies that are coming in based on data and technology that are basically pushing out your traditional freight forwarders. And these companies or digital exchanges are starting to basically become very influential in the space. And then there's the move to smart ports. And whether you're talking about a smart airport that basically needs to move people across, or a smart maritime port that needs to move containers across, there is a huge push to this smart port theory or concept. And just touching on that, what exactly is a smart port? Well, it's the ability to basically move equipment and goods as quickly as possible via a terminal. And this is what increases the competitiveness of a terminal versus another. And there's a huge competitiveness between one terminal versus another as to how quickly they can become smart, how quickly they can become efficient, and how quickly they can move cargo across their premises. So we are seeing robotics. We are seeing the Internet of Things sensors basically linked to what we call smart containers that basically move from one point to the other. The use of blockchain and smart contracts, the integration of port ecosystems, and the ability to pay remotely. So data and communications becomes more and more prevalent, specifically now with the COVID, prevalent on mobile devices. And I'll be basically talking to you about an example. So when we talk about the port ecosystem, of which the rail, as I mentioned earlier, is a part of, when we talk about a port ecosystem, we are talking about various entities. We're talking about the Port Authority, which is usually a government entity that owns the land. They concede it to a terminal operator who then works with customs, trade agencies, shipping lines, rail and trucks, customs brokers, and freight forwarders to basically form part of this ecosystem. Within this, these entities all use what we call back-end systems. They all use different computer systems, whether it's a port community system, a terminal operating system, a e-invoicing platform, etc. If there is the need to optimize the technological process, which is a key demand from the Kazakhstan Trade Forum, there is a need to basically to link and connect all the dots in this. To do that, you not only need to connect all the different companies at play, but all the different service providers. So creating a partnership within this environment is very, very important. So giving you an example as to how this would work is in today's environment, you have the port ecosystem in the middle and you have the different supply chains. So you have different companies around the world basically interacting with each other, buying and selling, and they in turn need to interact with the port ecosystem so that you basically get an end-to-end global supply chain. In the middle of this is the Mastercard payment system. We today settle the payments between banks and entities. We settle the payments between companies A to company B, and we settle entities between buyers and sellers. So we already play in this field. What we are looking now to do is how do we integrate this into the port ecosystem? Because it can become very complex. There are a lot of players in this. There's one major payment network, but in terms of service providers, there are other players. So there's a lot of entities that are looking at big data, last mile delivery, logistics management, trucking, freight forwarding. There are a lot of companies that are playing in the space, which makes it more and more complex and makes it more important to choose the right partner when modernizing your technology, optimizing your technology, and specifically increasing efficiencies. So very important to choose who is the right partner. So what was Mastercard do in this space? So we go from a simple cash replacement in some areas where terminals are still using cash and simply just replacing the cash payment, to digitizing the experience of the importer-exporter paying and receiving funds with the terminal, to more sophisticated reconciliations that require back-end processing. And to even further steps is blockchain and smart contracts. What a lot of people don't know is that Mastercard holds the third most amount of patents in blockchain. We use our proof of provenance technology to actually trace not only the containers, but link those containers to an actual payment. That is where we see increased efficiencies, and that's where it's moving to. Now, I'd like to just finish off with an example as to how Mastercard is working in this space. As I mentioned, I know that the Central Asia and Kazakhstan is very much rail-centric, but one of the players here is actually Dubai Ports World. Dubai Ports World is looking to link basically the maritime ports and basically moving into rail. As you may be aware, DP World has actually bought some assets, railway assets in places like India, etc. We as Mastercard have partnered with Dubai Ports World in an initiative to digitize port payments. What this means is we are digitizing the ability of buyers or importers and exporters to actually pay and receive funds, remotely. So the ability to do this is something that we are actually rolling out globally in partnership. So not only have I explained to you as to what is the theory, what is the strategy, but a live execution, which you can basically look up online. I hope that this has been informational enough for you. I hope this has provided you an insight into what's going on in the world of global supply chain. In a very short time, I hope that I've been able to provide you with some bullets on what's going on in terms of trends, and specifically how Mastercard is enabling the global supply chain to actually move by not only facilitating payments, but enabling those payments to be linked to the data that they facilitate the exchange and optimization of freight. Thank you.